In this video, we will learn about the formation of the perfect tense of deponent verbs. That's covered in the grammar from 3B on pages 154 through 56 in your textbook. We have already learned the perfect of non-deponent verbs. It's easy to make. Merely remove the long I from a verb's third principal part and add the following endings. I isti it, imus istis erunt. Do remember, these endings are unique to the perfect. We learned two sets of endings in the past, one for non-deponent and one for deponent verbs, and those endings are used for all other conjugated tenses in Latin. However, these unique endings are used for the perfect and are used only for the perfect and must be memorized specially. Let's look at an example. Let's say we want to form the perfect of amo. We look at the principal parts. Amo, amari, amawi, amatus. We look at the third principal part. We remove the long I and we get the stem amau. We then can add the appropriate endings. Amawi, amawisti, amawit, amawimus, amawistis, amawerunt. Let's do that again. Let's look at the verb copio, copiti, capi, coptis. Again, we remove the long I from the third principal part. We get the stem cape, to which we add the endings. Capi, capisti, capit, capimus, capistis, caperunt. Non-deponent verbs, with some minor exceptions, of all conjugations, regular and irregular, form the perfect in the same way. The perfect of deponent verbs is even easier to form than that of non-deponents. The third principal part of a deponent verb is the first person singular perfect form. That was also the case for non-deponent verbs. You might remember that when you say amo, amari, amawi, amatus, amawi, the third principal part, was also the first person singular perfect form. That means that when you say the principal parts of minor, which means I threaten, and you say minor, minari, minatus sum is a form that means I threatened or have threatened. Minatus sum is the perfect of minor, minari, minatus sum. Similarly, for the verb ingredior, ingredi, ingressus sum means I entered or have entered. It is the perfect form of the deponent verb. Note that the first word in the third principal part of a deponent verb is a participle. For instance, minatus sum. In minatus sum, minatus is a participle. In ingressus sum, ingressus is a participle. A participle is an adjective made from a verb. Now this participle, and Latin has several participles made from verbs, this participle, which is the first part of the perfect tense of a deponent verb, declines just like multus, multum, multum. That is, as an adjective of the first and second declension. Being adjectives, these participles have to agree in gender and number with the subject of the sentence. Just as a man says bonus sum, and he has to use a masculine ending bonus because he's masculine, but a woman says bonus sum, and she must use a feminine ending because she's feminine, she, the subject, is feminine, a man must say minatus sum or ingressus sum using masculine forms for the perfect of these deponent verbs. And a woman must say minata sum or ingressa sum using feminine forms of the participles in the perfect deponent. To conjugate the perfect of deponent verbs, we simply conjugate the sum of the third principal part. But we have to also change the form of the participle to agree with the subject. Here's an example of the verb minor, minari, minatus sum conjugated in the perfect. Minatus, minata, minatum sum. Minatus sum is what a man would say. Minatus sum is what a woman would say. And minatum sum is what a neuter object would say. Of course, it's rare that neuter objects talk. If you're talking to a person, use the second person. When you're talking to a man, you would say minatus est. To a woman, you would say minata es. And to a neuter thing, you would say minatum es. In the third person, if you were speaking about a man, you would have to say minatus est. If you were speaking about a woman, you would have to say minata est. And if you're speaking about a neuter thing, you'd have to say minatum est. In the plural, it's the same story, though of course we have to use plural endings instead. So, if we're a group of men, and we're talking about ourselves, and we want to say we have threatened, we would say minati sumus. If we're a group completely of women, we would say minatai sumus. And if we are a group of neuter things, we'd say minatos sumus. Similarly, if you're talking to a group that is all men, you would say minati estis in the second person plural. If you were talking to a group of all women, you would say minatai estis in the second person plural. And finally, you would say minata estis to a group of things. And when you're talking about third person plural, a they, depending upon the gender of the they, you would say minati or minatai or minata sunt. Normally, we abbreviate this conjugation to make it a little easier to write, and we just write minatus, minata, minatum sum, and that, of course, implies all these forms here. I think you'll understand that. Now, all deponent verbs of all conjugations form the perfect in the same way. Remember, the nice thing about the perfect, both non-deponent and deponent, is that all verbs form their perfect in the same way. Once you're in the realm of the perfect, you no longer have to worry about the 5 different conjugations of Latin. All verbs behave exactly the same way. Let's look at a few examples of deponent verbs just to finish up. Here's minatus es. This would mean you have threatened or you threatened if you were speaking to a man, because you'll note this masculine ending. If you were speaking to a woman, you would have to say minata es and use the feminine ending. Here we say Marcus minatus est. Marcus has threatened or Marcus threatened. And we use the us ending because Marcus is masculine. But if we were talking about a slave woman, we would have to say serva minata est. The slave woman has threatened or threatened. If we're a group of all men or a group of partially of men, we could have a few women too, we would say minati sumus because the masculine gender sort of triumphs over the feminine gender when you have a group of people. But if we were a group completely of women, we would have to say minatai sumus using the feminine. In the third person plural, you would say servai minate sunt to mean the slaves have threatened or threatened because the slaves are masculine. But if you wanted to say the prostitutes threatened or have threatened, you'd have to say meretrices minate sunt using the feminine because meretrices, prostitutes are feminine. One final note here I want to point out. Do notice that we use the present tense of the verb to be. That's a little counterintuitive for an English speaker because if you use the present tense of the verb to be in an English sentence, you tend to have a present tense form. But in Latin, notice the perfect of deponent verbs is made with the present tense of the verb sum. The end. This has been a Barking Blue Heeler production.